Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching. After a day's work, John decided to leave his car at the car wash on his way home, as he had an important meeting with a potential business partner tomorrow. We serve excellent coffee, and the kitchen is good. Go up to the second floor and relax for half an hour. When your car will be ready, we will let you know, said the young man kindly to John. Thank you. I'll go to the store nearby. John had really noticed this lingerie store for women for a long time and planned to visit it sometime. As soon as he entered the store, he was a bit taken aback. He had never seen such a variety of beauty before. Of course, adult movies didn't count. A nice salesgirl came up to him and asked him, "Are you looking for anything in particular, or are you considering options?" she asked. John certainly didn't expect such impudence from the salesgirl. He was obviously not ready for such a turn of events, so he blushed a little and answered, I would like to look at different options and then buy something specific." "Can I do that?" The girl smiled kindly and said, "Then let me show you a showcase with new products. There are a lot of interesting models." Now John is standing in front of the showcase with novelties and blushing and pale. Two girls are standing nearby and arguing about which negligee is better to choose, black or red. "Let's ask a man," said one of them. "Man, which one do you like?" asked the other one. John was completely confused. Of course, in his 40s, he is not a timid dozen, but in such a conversation he has never had to participate before. So he answered the first thing that came into his head. "I think green would be more effective." "Girl, is there such a model in green color?" John asked the saleswoman and was shocked at how he did it. The salesgirl smiled again and said, "There is no such model of negligee in green color. More prefer red, black, or white colors. If you want exactly green, there is a great set of green leather. I'll bring it to you now," said the girl and ran to the warehouse. John dreamed right now to be on the program field of miracles without a single chance to win, than to stand here and wait for another portion of improvisation from himself. Suddenly he remembered that he was not a kid, but the head of a large architectural company, and he needed to make an urgent phone call. He pulled out his cell phone and began aimlessly flipping through its screen. He would have liked to rush back, but that would have looked awkward in the eyes of the two beautiful strangers who had entrusted him with such an important matter as choosing a negligee. Oh, miracle! There was a solution. John's fingers opened one of the messengers where the last correspondence was with his secretary, Anna. Anna was online. What luck! "Anna, how do you choose lingerie as a gift? What do you even call these things?" John wrote, then took a couple of pictures of the shop windows and sent them to Anna. "John, there are many different names. You better orient yourself to your taste. What seems pleasing to your eyes, then choose the lingerie and ask for the right size." I got a reply from Anna. "And how do I know the size?" John wrote back. At that moment, the saleswoman came running in with a green leather set in her hands. "Here is what you asked for," she said. "It's not for me. It's for those ladies over there," said John. The girls were already in the next apartment, saw the green set and laughed out loud. One of them said, "So it's not for us, but for this gentleman. Apparently his green color excites him." John realized that he had found his own adventure today and was looking for a way to get out of that store as quickly as possible. At this point, the correspondence with the secretary reached a climax. Anna realized that the chief thinks absolutely nothing in the classification of underwear, so she wrote briefly, "John, don't agonize. This store sells a certificate. It is invented especially for men. Better buy it and give it to your spouse, then she can choose what she needs." John breathed a sigh of relief and asked the saleswoman to make the certificate better. This option actually turned out to be an easier solution. As soon as John stepped outside the store, he heard a woman's voice behind him. "Man, we had to buy what we could get our hands on without you. Now who would appreciate this? Can you help me with this? Standing behind John's back was one of the girls who had just picked out a negligee in the store. John wasn't quite sure what they wanted him to do. At that moment, the girl deftly guided her hand over his body, patted him just below the waist, and ran off to her friend, who was waiting a few steps away from her. Thus, John arrived home a lot later than usual. As soon as he entered the apartment, he heard the voice of his wife, Julia. "Oh, here you are. Not Dusty. Where have you been?" "My office. Where else? I washed the car on the way. I've been putting it off." "And who did you have such an important meeting with?" "Who is she?" "Julia." "Why her?" "Even if it is her, you know I can only meet people on business." "I don't understand your interrogations. You have something to hide, so you're on the defensive." John realized Julia didn't want to go into detail. Her mood was already ruined. She'd already had a lot of fantasies, and now it was useless to try to influence her. "What's for dinner?" "We've already eaten. If you want it, go ahead and eat it yourself," Julia mumbled. John thought for a moment and decided that he didn't want to eat alone. It wasn't the first time he'd seen such a scene in his family. Julia had been jealous from the beginning. At the time, John liked it, even flattered him. He took everything as a cute joke and played along with Julia's emotions, sometimes ostentatiously looking in the direction of other people's girls. Once, after such a joke, Julia fell into a real hysteria. When John tried to calm her down, she said that in previous relationships her boyfriend had betrayed her, and now it seemed to her that she would be betrayed by John as well. It wasn't until after the wedding that John realized how much this issue was interfering with their relationship. After the birth of their 2 children, Julia's jealousy began to grow. So Julia's mood today was not unexpected. Before going to bed, John once again tried to distract Julia by talking, but nothing worked. Then John took out a certificate for underwear from his wallet and put it in his briefcase. "I'll give it to her next time, when she's in the mood. She'll find a reason to nag me again, and she might embarrass me in front of the kids," John thought. John's business meeting went well. A contract was signed, and his firm would receive much more money than it had been earning before. This was convenient because John had been planning a family vacation abroad for a long time, and today's successful deal was the perfect excuse to book a trip for the whole family. He decided to surprise his family, so he didn't tell his wife and kids about it. With almost 3 months of time ahead of him, he still has time to please his loved ones. When Julia heard the good news, she dryly congratulated her husband. But there was a kind of uneasiness inside her. She needed to share this with her friend urgently. It was very familiar to her. She and her friend Sarah met at a coffee shop. "You know, everything seems to be going well. John's business is booming. We're living well, but I keep getting the feeling there's something fishy going on. Tell me, is it my imaginary fears, or is it really the case that happiness has to be paid for at some point?" Julia asked. Sarah was a typical friend who said whatever came into her head at the moment and didn't think much about the effect her words might have on her suspicious friend. So she said the following: "Absolutely cloudless happiness happens only in fairy tales, and that only at the end of the fairy tale. And in life, everything is not so simple. If we think that everything is too good, it means that we are not told something or we do not notice something." Sarah thought she had said something very clever and deeply philosophical. But Julia believed such words unreservedly because they seemed to her to be undeniable facts of real life. And the fact that a man could do well for himself in all spheres of life if he wished, it really seemed like a fairy tale. In this respect, too, Julia was a typical malleable friend. "It seems to me that John can change at any moment. My greatest fear is that I'll miss the moment and find out too late." Julia continued to give her friend an excuse to mislead her about her own life. A woman's intuition does not deceive. If it hurts somewhere, you should be more attentive to it. Then again, most men, when they're successful, have a lot of self-indulgence. You really have to be on your guard. And the fact that you might miss this moment is guaranteed. Sarah added more oil to the fire. Julia really thought about it after those words. But Sarah wasn't going to stop. I tell everyone in such cases the story of my sister's friend. She once accidentally found out that her husband had been cheating on her for 10 years. The worst part was she never suspected it because he was always on time in the evenings, never slept out, and certainly never went on vacation without his family. How did they do it? The husband and his mistress met twice a week during work hours, did their business, and went their separate ways. That's how it happens. That's the amazing story Sarah told today. After these words, Julia completely sank into her usual destructive state. Now it seems to her that John only does that all day long, cheats on her with other women, but in the evening comes home on time, tired from work, and pretends to be a loving father and husband. Now she had the idea to find out John's every move. Where he goes during the day, where he eats lunch and with whom, what time he leaves the office and where he goes. What if he also cheated on her for a good 10 years, and she does not even know? True, Julia never thought about what she would do if she really discovered her husband's mistress. What would happen after that? Would she be ready to stand up for her principles and break up with her husband? Or would she have to put up with it because she is not capable of anything else but scandals and insults? At this time, John was having lunch with his friend Alexander at a restaurant. I'm doing well too. I haven't had a vacation in a year, and I'm thinking of going away with my family for a week one of these days. Well, John, you could use a vacation too. If you work without a break, it's not far from burnout. Said Alexander. Yes, you're right. I've already decided everything about it. Booked a trip to Bali in the summer. We will go there as a family. There's just one thing that's bothering me. You can't leave all your business unattended. Come on, buddy. Nothing catastrophic will happen in a week. So go on your way to new adventures, Alexander said. No, I'm fine with business. I'm more worried about my old problem. You know, Julia is jealous. Every day lately it's been a scandal. I bought her a lingering certificate the other day, but I never gave it to her because the atmosphere in the house isn't right. I didn't tell her about the trip because I never know what's going to happen tonight or tomorrow. Because Julia is such an unpredictable woman, you know. Life with her is like a powder keg. When I was young, it all seemed like a nice little prank. But as the years go by, when you're working so hard, you want the peace and warmth of home. What's the problem? You know what normal guys do in such cases. Find yourself a quiet cutie and rest with her, said Alexander. No, I don't want to do that. Yes, and there is no time for all sorts of affairs. I am now so a little in sentimentality. Never mind, forget it, John said, and changed the subject. On one of these scandalous days, Julia said that she was having difficulties at work. She doesn't like her boss, who is always giving her a hard time. Because of this, Julia is in constant stress and takes it out on her children and husband. John, like a caring man, offered his solution. Quit. Rest for a while. Recover your nerves, then look at a new job, he advised. Julia liked this suggestion. She immediately quit her job and spent the next 2 months shopping and going to beauty salons. She did look refreshed and rested, but deep down, nothing had changed. When she got bored, she struck up conversation with John. I'd like to contribute to your accomplishments too. Maybe there's a position for me in your company, Julia said. John, being a prudent businessman and possessing some life wisdom, realized that having a common business with his loved ones was a sure way to ruin a relationship. But he realized that his refusal could again provoke Julia's jealousy. She would think that he had a mistress in the office, so he would not let his wife close to his business. So he was forced to take her to work with him. John was right. Julia's first intention was to take full control of her husband, not to contribute to his business, as she herself claimed. From her first days in John's office, Julia hid from everyone that she was the boss wife. By doing so, she hoped to build a closer and more sincere relationship with her new co-workers. But no matter how hard Julia tried, it was impossible to find out anything spicy about John. Because in this office, People really worked from morning till evening, and they were not up to intrigue. It was the receptionist, Selena, who was under scrutiny. It was no accident. "It is a friend," Sarah advised Selena as possible to look closely at the youngest and most beautiful girls in the office. The youngest and prettiest turned out to be Selena's secretary. Now, every day of Julia's workday was spent keeping an eye on Selena. After a few days, it dawned on her. Indeed, this Selena knows much more about John than even his wife. If he stays late after work, she stays late after work. She stays. If he comes in later, she shows up by then. Julia had now made up her mind to talk to Selena, but to keep her on her toes, she needed clear evidence, or at least a hint of a close relationship with her boss. As Julia stood at the window of her office, thinking about implementing her devious plan, her gaze fell on the guy who delivers water to their office. Julia met this guy in the lobby, took him aside, put a couple of bills in his pocket, and explained something to him. He nodded and went on to deliver the water to the various offices. When the water boy left John's office, he said casually to Selena, "The chief says he's tired. He wants a massage." Selena quickly got up from her desk and headed towards the chief's office. Julia watched from the sidelines. She no longer had any doubt that Sarah was right. Now, she just had to wait a few minutes and break into John's office to catch the cheater in the act. Of course, from the outside, everything looks very illogical. But the point is that pathological jealousy is dangerous. In this state, a person is unable to hear the arguments of reason. He is unable to control his unreasonable emotions. It is by this he pushes his partner to real cheating. It is because of such features jealousy destroys all relationships. Julia's mind understood all this, but she could not live according to this understanding. She had long since become addicted to jealousy scandals. She needed to instill a strong sense of guilt in her husband, then wait for him to justify himself. For her poisoned soul, it looks like a proof of love and fidelity. Julia already mentally imagined the picture in John's office. But when she rushed in, she saw a slightly different picture. Selena was standing next to John's desk. He was sitting in his chair and was telling her something, passionately. They clearly weren't expecting Julia. John was startled as usual at the sight of an angry Julia. Selena, of course, still did not know that Julia was John's wife. Therefore, she was in no hurry to leave the office. But John had asked for it himself. As soon as Selena was out the door, Julia began her usual tantrum. John was able to quickly prevent a pointless conflict by reminding his wife that her tantrums could make her look like the boss's wife, and that she herself would have to keep a tight rein on his employees. Julia left the office in a rage much earlier than usual. Now she had no doubt that it was with Selena that John was cheating on her. Probably for the last 10 years, they almost every day meet during working hours, do their racy business, and then go home as if nothing had happened. Although 10 years ago, Selena was almost a child and John was madly in love with Julia. But Sarah had told him that it happened in life. When the day was over, John didn't want to go home at all. The thought of having to prove his innocence again was driving him up the wall. There was nothing worse than being accused of something you didn't even think about. In fact, in the afternoon, Selena suddenly walked into John's office and asked him if he wanted a massage since he was tired, to which John was somewhat surprised. He thanked Selena for her concern, but honestly admitted that he was really feeling tired lately. Then he decided to take a few minutes of respite and was telling Selena about his plans to vacation with his family in Bali. Then he said that for the time being, he had to pull himself together and fulfill the strategic goals for the current quarter at all costs. Selena, who had been working at this company for over a year now, knew her boss's principles very well and treated him with the utmost respect. Now, when he decided to deviate from the chain of command for a couple of minutes and talk about distracting topics, she was polite and listened to him. At that moment, Julia, whom Selena considered the new girl, and had tried in every way possible to support her within the collective, had just burst in. No other dark stories here. And that's what John has to prove at home tonight in front of Julia. But he didn't want to spend another evening in such humiliation. So after work, he went to the pool and spent the rest of the night in the company of his friend Alexander. Alexander, it's true. Life goes by, and it's as if we've seen nothing good. Don't you ever get that feeling? John asked. My friend, why have you become so sentimental? And what do you mean you haven't seen anything good? Your business is thriving. Your children are growing. Your family is alive and well. You have a team of professionals behind you. You are surrounded by loyal business partners. Why do you have a feeling that your life is incomplete lately? Alexander asked. I told you before, too. I no longer have the strength to fix our relationship with Julia. She's overstepping her bounds. She wanted to get a job with me. I knew right away she wanted to take control of me. But I let her. I thought that if she saw my real lifestyle, she might calm down. But no, she suspects me of having an affair with my secretary Selena, and she herself tries to arrange ticklish situations involving her. I don't understand what she's trying to do. I no longer have the strength to prove my loyalty to her. After all, it's very insulting. What did I ever do to her that she thought so badly of me? I understand that she had suffered from her ex-boyfriend before me, but why should I have to pay for it all my life? John said, not hiding his emotion. Oh, that's it. You say her ex cheated on her. Actually, it's a real such disease. It should be treated only with a doctor. I guess even the ex has nothing to do with it. People suffering from pathological jealousy, it's not uncommon. It's just that not everyone knows about it. I remember my grandfather was one of those people. Once, in a fit of jealousy, he beat his wife to death. Do you know how much anger a man carries around for no good reason? I sympathize with you, my friend. But what is it for you to tame one woman, when under your leadership the whole team works like clockwork? Alexander encouraged his friend. And I thought a lot about your advice to have a mistress. In principle, it's not a bad idea. What the hell difference does it make if I end up guilty anyway? But where would I find an adequate woman? John said dreamily. Tired of Julia's constant bad moods, John was now even spending his weekends in his office. One Saturday afternoon, he worked alone in his office. All the employees are resting today, and the office is completely quiet. John decided to stretch his legs a little and went out into the lobby. As he stood in front of the window looking outside, the elevator door opened, and he heard the approaching footsteps of a woman's heels. Oh, that must be Julia, John thought. But a second later, he heard an unfamiliar voice behind him. Hello. I had an appointment with Selena for next week, but I happened to be here today and thought I'd check to see if she was here. I represent N Group. We used to supply you with building materials. Now we have an updated catalog. I think you'll be interested. Excuse me, with whom can I discuss this issue? Said an unfamiliar girl, not distinguished by special beauty and glamour. Nevertheless, there was something special about her that John stood before her like an enchanted man. Let's say she can discuss it with me. Please come into the study. By the time they reached the office, the girl had managed to tell a lot of information about John's company. She seemed to be a pro at what she did. John looked at the catalog of new offers and listened to the girl without interrupting her. Do you live on Vestnet Sova behind the outhouse? The girl suddenly asked. John was a little surprised and answered, That's right. How did you get so much information about us? No, we don't collect it on purpose. I'm just observant. I'm leaving you this catalog. You take your time to look through it later. When should I call you to clarify the details of the supply contract? Asked the girl. Now, John was even more dumbfounded. This girl is so confident that she does not consider anything else than the prospect of successful cooperation. Such an employee is the dream of any manager. As much as he would have liked to make fun of such confidence, he did not do it, because such an attitude to his work is very valuable. To Mahdi, the ability to maintain such an attitude speaks of a certain strength of personality. All of that combined deserves respect. John asked to call the girl in the middle of next week, but She didn't agree to that. The whole of next week is jammed with new meetings and new agreements. Therefore, there is hardly any time for you, she surprised him again. John, who'd been enjoying the girl's atypical behavior before, was slightly perplexed for a moment. How could she not have time for me? He almost didn't say it out loud, but the girl was ahead of him this time. I will call you myself at the end of next week. Then you and I will agree on everything else. The girl talked a lot, but finished her presentation suddenly and quickly. After a short goodbye, she flew away from John's office with a flying gait. In front of him was left a catalogue and a business card on it. Anna and her phone number. Surprisingly, she hadn't even listed her position in the company. That, too, seemed a puzzling approach to John. From that day on, Anna never left John's mind. Where could she have seen him? What made her so sure that his company would buy construction goods from them? It's understandable, though. It's in the best interest of both companies. And who is she in that company? Why did she come in on her day off? Could this also be another Julia trap? When Anna called at the end of the week, John was already sure that all they had to do was to agree on the terms of delivery. He wanted it so badly himself. It was the perfect excuse for him to have one more conversation with this amazing girl and see what other tricks she was capable of. But there were no more tricks she was capable of. After signing the contract, Anna became extremely reserved and dry. She now dialed John regularly to briefly remind him of the need to make payment for the shipment. She said nothing more. After a while, John himself couldn't stand it and invited her to dinner. She agreed at first, but at the last moment tried to cancel. John did not allow it to do so. During the dinner, Anna talked mostly about her work. John tried to find out something personal from her. He barely managed to find out that she was single and quite happy with her life. John was now anxious to meet her regularly for dinner. It became quite clear to him that Julia had nothing to do with her, because this girl is her own person, and it's hard to bend her to someone else's will. A few months passed, and John began to actively seek Anna's attention. It wasn't that easy. The simple scenario of a relationship between a married man and a free girl lived only in Julia's head, like many other married, jealous women in the world. First, Anna declared that she absolutely did not accept a relationship with a married man. Of course, John could not argue with her and suggest any other option. The date of the planned family vacation to Bali was approaching. By this time, John realized that he didn't want this vacation at all, and it was because of Julia's constant scandals. But to be quite honest, he would like to go to some island with Anna and his children. Julia still suspected Selina of having an unholy relationship with her husband. After the time she'd tried to arrange some sort of workplace retreat with her own hands, John had not explained himself for the first time in his life. In response to her tantrums, he'd turned on complete ignore. Julia thought she had found her husband's weak spot, and he was such a scoundrel that he wasn't even going to rehabilitate himself in her eyes. Then she decided to go another way, to punish this Selina. Julia's devious plans have already led her to an unfamiliar house a few days later. It was not difficult for her to find out all the details of Selina's life from social networks. Now, when she has in her hands all the important information about her, Julia decided to tell everyone close to the girl about her vicious connection with a married man and with her boss. She first pressed the doorbell, then began to pound the door fiercely with her hands. A young man opened the door. "Hi, I need to see Sam." "Hi, I'm Sam. I'm here to see you. As far as I know, you're dating Selina Petrova, who works for a construction design company." "Yes, that's right. I'm getting married to her soon." "Who are you?" "That's not important. It's more important that you know who your fiancé is. Your Selina is having an affair with my husband. You just need to do your homework before you marry her," Julia said. "Wait, why should I take your word for it? Where did you get this information?" "You ask a lot of unnecessary questions, young man. If you think they'll exonerate your girlfriend, you're wrong. I'm the only one who's not wrong, as life has shown. Bless you, Julia said, and was about to leave. At that moment, the elevator door opened, and another young man about Sam's age stepped out. He came to the door of Selina's apartment, said hello to Sam, and asked, "What's the matter? Who is it?" "I just saw her myself." She rang the doorbell. "If you're interested, listen to her. She says something about Selina." "Good afternoon, young lady. Were you looking for Selina?" the young man asked. "What's it to you?" Julia said. "I'm her brother. My name is Archie. If you have any urgent business, you can give it to me." "Selina's at work now, I'll tell her," the young man replied politely. Julia was pleased. Why not let her brother know the true face of his sister? "Well then, tell your Selina not to get too involved with married men. Their wives might find out and get angry, and she'll lose a lot. Why don't you tell me more about this married man? Who are you?" Julia didn't expect to be asked so many questions, so she got even more angry. "I already told her fiancé everything." "Ask your sister the rest," Julia said, and headed towards the elevator. But Archie wouldn't let her. He took her by the arm and led her by force into the hallway of the apartment. Sam closed the door, and Archie pressed Julia tightly against the wall and said, "Now I demand proof of my sister's connection to someone else's husband. You think they're so naive they're not hiding their affair. You only have to watch them from the sidelines to be convinced. If you need proof, go to her work anytime and see for yourself." Julia almost gave herself away. "I will. If what you say turns out to be slander, what are you prepared to pay for insulting my sister?" Archie said. Julia was sure that her words would be believed as easily as she believed the words of her friend Sarah. But these young men behaved in a completely unexpected way. Julia managed with great difficulty to get out of Archie's arms and leave their apartment. After she left, Archie turned to Sam. "What do you think about this?" "I don't even know. If the woman had any proof, but she's just saying things. Or maybe she does know something." At Sam's words, Archie realized that doubt had crept into his soul, and he was almost ready to believe the woman's words. Archie now came as close to Sam as possible, looked straight into his eyes, and said, "Remember, Sam, until I know who this woman is and what she's trying to accomplish, you will say nothing about this to Selina. I'm sure she would never take such a step. If you have doubts about her, you still have time before the wedding. There's no need for you to traumatize my sister with difficult conversations. If that woman's words prove true, then I will help you separate myself." Archie said firmly. Sam got it right. That same evening, Archie invited his sister to a cafe and talked about what had happened. Selina was shocked. Of course, she guessed that Julia was watching her in a strange way, but she didn't know that it was the chief's wife, and she had real suspicions of non-existent relations with John. The next day, Selina hurried to tell this shocking news to some of her colleagues. What if some of them already know that the chief's wife has been working with them for a long time? And if some of them do not know, then we need to warn them well so as not to inadvertently become victims of such intrigues that Julia arranges Selina. The news traveled fast, and the atmosphere in the office changed immediately. Now every employee in the office tiptoed, talked in whispers, and tried to leave his office as little as possible during the workday. The strange act of the boss's spouse frightened them. Some of them thought that it might be a ploy of the boss himself to check each employee for honesty or something else. But the theory that Julia was just suffering from pathological jealousy and obsessed with finding her husband's mistress seemed unlikely to the employees. Archie was worried about his sister, so he decided to see the matter through. As long as this woman had direct access to his sister, anything could be expected from her. Since she was able to deceive the entire staff, and her husband allowed her to do it, what other unexpected surprises would this married couple be capable of? So he went to John's office and told him everything. John was shocked by Julia's behavior. In the end, he had to honestly admit that he was forced to hire Julia on the condition of anonymity. He also talked about Julia's cute habit, like uncontrollable jealousy, and apologized for her inappropriate behavior. I think the continued presence of my sister in such sensitive circumstances will be detrimental to her in one way or another. Therefore, I would advise you to look for another secretary. Selina will most likely not work for you any further. Believe me, it would be better for everyone, said Archie in closing. Well, Selina can decide whether she wants to stay or not. I have no complaints about her. She's a dedicated and disciplined worker. As far as I know, she has plans to transfer to another department in my company after graduation. I would be happy if Selina decides to grow as a specialist within my company. But team climate is an important factor for success. So I will support her in whatever decision she makes, said John. Selina didn't mind changing her job either. She was a little ashamed that Julia had found a reason to suspect her of a non-existent relationship with her boss. She must have thrown jealousy and tantrums over Selina on more than one occasion. So she'd come to her boss with a resignation letter, and he'd signed it without question. Only both of them were disgusted by the fact that they had to make this decision from despair, amid shame and guilt for non-existent offenses. After this incident, John tried to convince Julia to leave his company and just enjoy life without any work, to which he again received a violent reaction and a mountain of accusations. Instead of Selina, John's secretary was now a young man named Harvey. At first it was unusual for John to see a male secretary, but gradually Harvey showed his professionalism and potential. Now John even enjoyed working with Harvey. Julia also liked this decision. For a while it seemed that she calmed down and became kinder to her husband, but it was too late. John, after a long period of wooing and suffering, still got Anna's attention. Yes, he was right about her. She was extremely attentive to him, showed deep respect, and saw him as a true knight. John was surprised to find another interesting feature of Anna. In this relationship, it is almost impossible to calculate their connection, because Anna, on her own initiative, never calls, never writes, never calls, never writes, never calls John to solve any of her problems. John has to make an effort every time, wait several days for a meeting, and at the end of each date beg Anna to stay for another hour. John was hopelessly in love, infinitely happy, and no evidence in his life of a relationship with another woman. In one of these meetings, Anna delicately hinted that she had found 2 stripes on a pregnancy test. John assumed such a development and was not at all against it, although, of course, worried about the fate of a child out of wedlock. She didn't wait for his reaction. She was the first to speak up. You don't need to worry about anything. I will raise this child myself. There is no need for you to be involved and present in his life, Anna declared. No, our relationship has to change a little. I can't allow my child to be neglected and unsupported. And besides, 2 people must be involved in the upbringing of a child. Only then a balance of the masculine and feminine is formed in the child. John said. Anna did not comment on this in any way. She was living her own independent life and continued to do so throughout the pregnancy. Not to say she was that invulnerable. She had no parents, no significant others, no place of her own, yet she never demanded anything from anyone. That's what got her the most hooked on John. Not because John is so greedy for attention or money. It's just that Anna's lifestyle speaks to her inner strength, and strength always attracts other people. Another attempt to meet with Anna took a long time. She kept putting off meeting John, and only after 2 months she allowed him to visit her. John had hoped to see his beloved at the end of her pregnancy, but found her with a flat belly, taut and refreshed. She didn't bother him and told him the latest news herself. I had been putting off our meeting because I was in labor with Mady. He was born healthy, weighing almost 4 pounds and also mobile and active. John was extremely surprised and outraged. What does all this mean? Why can't I participate at least in such a crucial period of my child's life? Where is my child now? Where is it seen that a woman gave birth on her own? discharged from the hospital, recovered her health, hired a nanny, left the child with her, and finally found time to see his father. Wasn't she tempted to show this miracle to her father? But Anna, just as much as she claimed she wouldn't interfere with John, she continued to stick to her promises. Except John doesn't like it all that much. During the time when he has to wait for a meeting with her, or at least a casual message, he asks himself a lot of questions. How can it be that he finally meets the woman who gives him endless happiness, and he even barely gets a meeting from her? How is it possible that she generously gives him her love, her acceptance, respects his freedom without limits, and he in return cannot even devote an extra couple of days to her? Such thoughts created in John's soul complaints about himself as a man. If next to Julia he feels like an insignificant man, Anna makes him feel like a real knight. Only Julia is too much. He hasn't known for a long time where to find shelter from her to save at least bits of his personality. Next to Anna he rises again as a man, but it's so short-lived. Another idea crept up behind these thoughts. If Anna were more in his life would be much more interesting and happier. Susanna and Mike, John's children with Julia, are now grown up. They love their father very much. Their father loves them. John has always been a caring father, always involved in all the important events in his children's lives, regardless of their mother's moods. Now it also makes him sad. He raised such beautiful children, and his baby may not see his father at all if Anna remains true to her principles. John realized that it was time for action because he sees himself as a big egoist in relation to the woman he loves, not capable of any responsible actions. His actions were not long in coming. It remains only to achieve the next meeting with Anna so that she accepts the new circumstances of life. During this time, John discovered another mistake. He does not even know where Anna lives. He doesn't know her address because she won't even let him drive her home after dates. Or maybe she's just married. It's strange that such thoughts come into John's head after all this time. Well, if we remember that John asked Anna's name only after 2 weeks of communication. All these facts John says about his own selfishness and disrespectful attitude to the woman he loves. But why Anna never showed anything about it? Could it be that she took offense at it, but silently tolerated it? No, judging by Marty's drive toward her goals at work, she would never hide her resentments or secret desires. It's just that woman is crazy, that's all. Anna, we've been together almost 3 years, and I don't even know where you live. Let me drive you home myself tonight, said John after another date in a hotel room. Well, I take it that's probably the excuse you want to take a look at your son. Well, you can if he's awake or crying. Turns out Anna lives pretty far from the city center. It's a quiet village that doesn't have many houses, and almost all of them are old. Among those shabby walls and broken streets, only one small house stood out with a stylish exterior. John had no doubt that this was where his beloved lived. Most likely, she had done it herself too, without any help from anyone else, and so it was. When they got home, John turned to her. Take the baby and get out. I've got somewhere to take you. And don't mind me, it's very important. Anna did just that. Took little Maddie and got back in the car with John. The moment John held his son in his arms and looked at him for the first time, she didn't make a dramatic event out of it. All right. Enough with the smirking or you'll sniffle again, she said, and took the baby away. Back in the city, John brought them to one of the yards of the new buildings. Then he asked Anna and the baby to come out and took them into one of the apartments in the newly completed building. Anna, this is your apartment now. In the next few days, take your passport and we'll go to register it for you. And then you can take Marty and move in right away. Thank you, that's very helpful, commented Anna briefly. Harvey's secretary informed John that a certain Oliver had come to see him. John wasn't expecting any Oliver, but decided to accept if the man came. John, my name is Oliver, and I'm a private investigator. Recently we received an order for you. If you are interested, we can continue the conversation, said the strange man. And who is this client? Unfortunately, this is a professional secret. I cannot tell you the name of the customer, but in my profession, the ethical side of the issue plays a huge role. You understand, we can get to the deepest secrets in a person's life, and this can entail various changes in his life. And it's not always a pleasant change. Most often after our reports, long years of friendship, marriage, cooperation, and so on are destroyed. I have come to this conclusion on my own bitter experience that there is always a possibility to prevent a sad end. That's why I came to you. John immediately realized what he was talking about. It's a common practice for a wife to hire a detective to track down his affair with another woman and obtain evidence. The evidence helps the woman claw back some of the assets in the divorce. But detectives realize that it is always possible to prevent such an outcome while earning an additional fee. Actually, on this occasion, and Oliver sits in John's office. John immediately realized this. He opened his safe, counted out several large bills, and put them on the table in front of Oliver. You did the right thing. No one wants a sad ending. Take your fee and make a nice report for the client and save me the trouble, John said. Oliver was immensely glad that he had found such an adequate and understanding client. He understood without words that his wife hired a detective to follow him, and the detective to follow him, and the detective told the object of surveillance. Now Oliver could make a fake report, where John would be a faithful and honest husband. Julia could sleep well. The very next day, Oliver dialed Julia's cell phone and said, "Julia? Hello? It's Oliver for you. If you have time, please stop by our office this afternoon. We've been working on your order and have something to tell you." Julia arrived at Oliver's office on time. He greeted her warmly and got straight to the point. "We've been watching your husband John for several days, and this is what we've been able to establish. He starts his day at home, then heads to the office every day for lunch. He goes to one of the nearby cafes, where he has lunch with one of his employees, and after work he usually goes home. Sometimes he may stop at a supermarket or a car wash on the way. We have not been able to establish his relationship with any woman outside of his office. John doesn't have any personal connections within his team either," Oliver reported. "That's it?" "Yes, that's it. Now, Julia, you can rest easy about your husband. Your marriage is safe. In that case, I'll ask you to return the fee," Julia said. "Why is that? We've done a full scope of work. We've earned our fee. But you also hid one fact. When my husband drove some woman with a child to a village on the outskirts of the city and left her there. Also, after that, you went to my husband's office and had an appointment with him. What did you talk to him about?" Julia put the question squarely. "I came in as a potential client, and I needed to discreetly wire his office. It's not uncommon for executives to order girls into their offices. I looked for such facts, and I didn't find any. I just forgot to add it to the report," Oliver said. No matter how hard Julia tried to pressure the detective, she couldn't get her money back. But she didn't feel bad, because her friend Sarah was better than any detective. She took a picture of the house where John left a woman with a small child, asked the neighbors, and found out all the information about Anna. And all the information boiled down to the fact that Anna has been renting this old house for 2 years, and recently had a baby. Nobody else knows anything about her. The neighbors had never seen a man or anyone else visit her. But it was enough for Julia to know the address of the mistress. "What are you going to do about it?" Sarah asked her friend. "I'm going to put an end to this story. I've had enough. I've put up with all this for most of my life with John. How long he's been hiding from me. He should pay for this betrayal and deceit, and maybe he will pay for the rest of his life for treating me this way," Julia said with a sense of complete justice. It is commonly believed that every event in a person's life is solely his responsibility. But people forget that each of their actions has an impact on the lives of others. For example, the actions of our heroine, Julia. After the morning meeting in John's office, one of his employees asked him to take separately in his office. It was Arthur from the finance department. He's been working in John's company for a long time and is among the best employees. Unfortunately, recently, his life has been in a black streak. First, Arthur was in a traffic accident, and it took him quite a long time to recover. All this time, John supported his family and helped him in every possible way. Arthur managed to get back on his feet, but the mortgage arrears ended in a bad way. The debts grew to an unsustainable amount, and the bank let his apartment on the open auction. The whole process is almost over. Arthur only has to find a place to rent and move out with his family soon. He's here to talk to the chief about it. John, I'm really embarrassed to ask, but you realize that I've been going through an unstable period in my life lately. If you allow me, I need to spend a couple more days dealing with domestic issues. Arthur started the conversation from afar. Arthur, tell it like it is. What is your request? I'd like to take 2 or 3 days off work. I need to urgently find rented accommodation and move out of the apartment. And we haven't even started looking for a new place yet. What kind of place are you looking for? How about a cozy little house on the outskirts of town? They say the neighborhood is very quiet, peaceful, and the owners do not bother with visits. Moreover, it will cost you less than an apartment in the city. Settle there, save more money, and then at any time move to the city. Arthur was glad. John called Anna. She said that today she would move the rest of her things into her new apartment, and the house would be completely vacant. The owners were looking for new tenants. John asked her to tell the owners that responsible tenants were on their way. So Arthur and his wife Kathy and their son David moved into the small house where Anna had lived for several years. Anna had already moved into her new apartment, which was donated by John. The long disputes with the bank and the decision, not in favor of Arthur and his family, very upset Kathy. She dreamed as soon as possible to pay off the mortgage and start making designer repairs in her own apartment. Now these plans are postponed for an unknown period of time. As soon as they moved into their new home, another problem loomed on the horizon. Arthur announced that his mother was coming to visit them. Katie shuddered. Arthur's mother, Betty, is a willful woman. The last time Kathy had seen her was shortly before she and Arthur were married. That was when he brought Katie to introduce her mother to him, and Katie didn't like her right away. Her mother insisted that Arthur leave pregnant Kathy immediately and find another girl. But Arthur insisted on his own way. Then the mother took offense and refused to participate in their wedding. Arthur and Kathy hoped that after the wedding, time would pass. Betty would surely calm down and accept Kathy. But this did not happen. After that, they waited for the baby to be born, hoping that Betty would be happy about her first and only grandchild and would finally start to communicate with them. But this time, too, they were wrong. Arthur secretly called his mother from time to time, but she remained very cold. When he invited her to visit him, she put a condition to her son: divorce Kathy, then I will come. Betty was so principled that even when Arthur was in the hospital after the accident, she was limited to rare phone calls and never visited him. But as soon as she heard that Arthur had lost his apartment and moved to a rented place, she decided to visit them. Katie was well aware that it was going to be a difficult period. Betty would probably try to bring discord into her son's family, to provoke him to leave Kathy with the baby. And then the day came and there was Betty on Katie's doorstep. Kathy had tried her best to make her feel at ease. She set a fancy table for her arrival, took her to a spa the next day, and then went shopping for Betty. All the while she's been extremely reserved and cold. But there's hope for David. David is now 4 years old. It was the first time that Betai's grandmother saw him, and I think her heart thawed a little. David took an instant liking to his grandmother. Somewhere else, John was happy that 2 positive things had happened this week. Anna and her newborn son had moved into a new apartment, and his faithful assistant Arthur had temporarily solved the housing problem. At the end of the working day, he felt tired. Inside himself, he found himself wishing to see little Mady, to rock him in his arms and look at his sweet face. But it will not be so easy for him to do. Despite the purchase of the apartment and other efforts of John, Anna does not allow him to come to her with the child when he wants. The order of their meetings remained the same as it was back in the days when John lost his head from this wayward girl and with efforts to get her attention. For some reason he thought that after the pregnancy she would become attached to him. That didn't happen. Then he waited for Anna to need him after the birth of the child. But it did not happen. Then he bought a condo to mark his territory in her life, but that didn't change anything either. It made John feel frustrated, of course, but he didn't dare talk to Anna about it. He knows exactly what her answer will be. If John tries to impose something of his own, Anna will very politely and subtly make it clear that John is nobody in her life and has no right to determine anything. This added to his frustration. As he'd suspected, she hadn't answered her phone calls or text message. To distract himself from his emotions, John called his friend Alexander, and together they went on a real man's vacation. The time was approaching midnight, and Julia was angry. She dialed John's number every minute, but the answering machine kept saying the same thing. The phone was disconnected or out of range. Then Julia dialed the number of her friend Sarah. She answered immediately. Of course, for the last few years, they have only one topic of conversation. Where is John, and who is he spending time with? Usually Julia tells her hunches and concerns, and Sarah stirs the pot. Sarah doesn't do this on purpose. She just tells other examples of things she's witnessed herself. This time the conversation follows the same pattern. I gave you the address. Look for him there. You'll probably catch him in the act. Yeah, I've made up my mind. I have to end this, and I'm going to do it in a decisive way. Let the one who stole another man's man spend the rest of her life crying. What's on your mind if it's no secret? Sarah was curious. It's a secret for now, Sarah. When it's over, you and I will celebrate it, and it will be in the next few days, said Julia. John didn't go home that night for some reason. He decided to stay at Alexander's apartment after the men's rest. Since the time was late, he did not turn on his phone. He decided that, in the morning, he would take his time to look at the hundreds of missed calls and cursing messages from Julia, and not a single call back from Anna. And that's exactly what happened. Julia had planned everything carefully and guessed that John would probably spend tonight in the company of this unknown woman with a child. She was determined to be there in time. She drove her car to the house in the village, on the outskirts of town. Before getting out of the car, she went over the whole scenario in her head and looked at the pre-prepared package that was on the back seat of her car. Julia approached the house, pressed the doorbell first, as was her habit, and then immediately started pounding on the windows and doors with all her might. Come out, you filthy, dishonest woman. Let your shameless face be seen by everyone. I know you live here, and my husband has sleepless nights here. Julia shouted and kept pounding on the windows of the house. Betty, who was watching television while waiting for Arthur and Kathy, listened carefully to the threats and shouting. She went to the window and saw a woman pounding hysterically on the gate of the house. Betty decided to go out and find out what was going on. But while she was getting ready, Julia lost control of herself. So you're ashamed to even show your face to people. You don't want to come out, then blame yourself. I've had enough. Stay there and never come out, Julia said, pouring liquid from the bottles she had brought with her in the back of the car onto the walls, fence and gates of the house. When the neighbors saw what was happening, they were horrified and began to gather around the house. Finally, the gate opened and Betty peeked out. No sooner had she opened her mouth than she heard Julia hurling insults at her. Where's that Schlendra? Who is she to you? A daughter, I suppose. Well, Mother, you've brought up a real Schlendra. She's hanging around with my husband and has already had a child with him. But these people don't know me very well. Right now, it's all going to be over and I won't have a sin on me. Because it's all about justice, screamed Julia. The bewildered neighbors stared at the lighter Julia was waving while talking to Betty. She barely managed to squeeze out her question. You mean Katie? And I suspected her of that. At that moment, a frightened David saw his grandmother and ran toward her, shouting, Grandma, Grandma, Who is that aunt? Why is she shouting like that? David was a few steps away from the gate of the house and his grandmother, but Julia grabbed him and held him in place. She pulled another Molotov cocktail out of the bag and started dousing David with the words, "He who is born of sin should not live on this earth. If his mother is hiding, let his degenerate mother pay the price." Betty, seeing what was happening, clutched her heart and slowly fainted. One of the surrounding neighbors shouted to Julia, "Woman, why are you like this? Everything can be solved with words. Do not take sin on your soul on emotions." But Julia did not react. She continued to pour the incendiary mixture on every surface she could reach. Little David didn't realize what was happening. The women in the crowd of neighbors began to rush their husbands to do something to prevent trouble. The disaster could happen at any second, as Julia was still holding the lighter in one hand and holding little David's hand tightly in the other. It was with great difficulty that the neighbors managed to wrestle first the lighter out of her hands, then David. By the time the police arrived, Julia was no longer conscious of what was happening, but continued to scream and threaten her absent rival. Neighbors brought Betty to her senses and helped her back into the house. Arthur and Kathy could not even imagine the events that had taken place half an hour before they arrived home. By this time, Julia had been taken away by the police and the neighbors had gone home. After a while, Betty came to her senses, called Arthur to her and said, "I've told you all along that this girl will not bring good into your life. If she were good, you wouldn't be in this kind of trouble. But all that wasn't enough. She's with a married man and has a child with him. I demand you get rid of her immediately. Today, all your neighbors have heard the truth about her. Aren't you ashamed to live with it?" She said to Arthur. Arthur tried to change his mother's mind, but she wouldn't listen to him. A frightened David couldn't sleep all night, babbling about his aunt. Then Betty turned to Katie. "Don't be surprised. All your shenanigans have come to light today.